Yo, what's going on, everyone? I hope y'all are good. Today, I'm going to be going through the results of the political compass y'all did, and we're going to talk about what the results were and how we can interpret them, and what it kind of means for us, especially as it relates to political culture. So, before I dive in, the first thing I want to remind everyone is that the compass is constructed in such a way that these axes represent two different dimensions of the typical left right kind of dichotomy. So when we say left right, we generally know what we're talking about. You know, if someone's on the left or someone leans to the right, we know what that means. But the traditional way we talk about it is not adequate. So there can be an economic left right and a social slash cultural left right. So simply using one axis is not enough. We need an additional axis. To be fair, we probably need even more than two, but the more axes you add, the more complicated it gets. And if you added a third axis, it would be a cube, I can't think of how to where you fit in the cube. I don't know how to interpret that personally. So, so there is something to be said for keeping things, simple and elegant. And I think that's where the test, one of its strengths. So the x-axis is your economic stance. So, left would be high taxes, right would be low taxes, right? And this gets into the concept of liberty. So remember we talked about liberty, and liberty can mean personal freedoms or economic freedoms. So if you are economically right, you would favor more economic freedom to start a business, and it wouldn't be regulated by the government, free to, sell your labor or hire people and, make something of yourself, essentially. So yeah, that's the economic dimension of liberty. Now the y-axis, the social slash cultural axis, deals with liberty but in a different way. So liberty, again, if we're talking about freedom, liberty in the social sphere would be very little regulation on what you do with your body, what you put in your body, what things you do in your personal life or your private life. Those things are not going to be regulated. Or if you are socially, at this point we're talking about being socially left, but if you value liberty in the social sphere, you are not going to want to be regulated by the government or by even the notion of a traditional family structure or those kind of social institutions. You do not want to be constricted. So you want to be free to go do the things you want to do in your personal life. So I hope you guys see the difference here between economic left-right and social left-right. So if you are, if you are socially liberal, or if you are socially libertarian, that would be down here. That would be the highest amount of social liberty. Over here, this would be more social regulation. And so, and I guess what I mean by that is things, somebody who's to the right or on the authoritarian end of the social spectrum would probably not want to, make abortion extremely easy and accessible. Maybe they wouldn't want, a type of society that is immoral. Maybe they care more about virtue, things like that. And so regulation could come from the government, but it could also come from the family structure or, the groups you're a part of, or, the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, whatever. So essentially what I'm saying, guys, is that you can be economically left, but socially right, theoretically. You could be economically right and socially left. That would put you down here. You guys see what I'm saying? So up here would be like your Marxist-Leninists. Up here would be like fascism to the extreme. But like here is like your mainline, conservative, like nothing crazy. Down here is your, anarcho-capitalist, your right libertarians who want to abolish the state and just have capitalism, like completely unrestrained capitalism. Over here you have like the left libertarians that would be more like everyone works for each other, there's no bosses, and it's kind of communal in that sense. Well, it is communal in that sense, but it's on a smaller scale, like a hippie commune, honestly. Like, 100 people and they grow their own crops, stuff like that. So down here would be like the hippies. Over here is the anarchist capitalists. Over here it's the fascists, and over here it's the Marxist-Leninists. As you can see, nobody is in any of those extremes. We've got a couple left libs down here. But you know what? If anything, you guys are centrist for the most part, but y'all seem to lean a little bit left. But yeah, I mean, you guys seem to lean left on economic issues and social issues. So what I want to point out there is that, well, I guess the first thing I want to point out is that, again, most of you guys are right there in the middle. I consider that the middle. So there's always going to be natural variation, and that's what you get. But now we are starting to see a little bit more of the clump on this end. So what this would mean, according to the results anyway, is that you folks you value economic freedom for sure because you're not very far to the left, but you value economic freedom less than you value social, personal freedoms, right? So if you were, if you want to be free in your social life, you do not mind if economic policy is regulated in such a way. And I that's interesting. I mean, it makes enough sense, but it's interesting to see it, like right in front of you. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is that we have an R squared of 0.72, which is basically very, very strong. Now, this is only 27 people, so we're not. I would not say that this is scientific by any means, but just according to what we have data-wise, what the R squared means, 0.72 is 72%. So this trend line, which is basically just y equals mx plus b, like that's the slope, that's the intercept. This trend line can explain 72% of the correlation between x and y. So what this really means, put it in layman's terms, there is a correlation with being economically right or economic freedom on one end, but social regulation on the other. So this quadrant and this side of the spectrum and this side of the spectrum correlate with each other pretty strongly. Now, people don't go up farther than 2.2, 1.8, not very far. So maybe the trend is less this way and more this way. So maybe being economically or wanting economic regulation correlates with wanting freedoms in your social life. That's essentially what the trend line is saying. I think that's pretty interesting, and I kind of want to let you guys think about why y'all think that is. Maybe I'll make that part of the discussion post. Now, there is one theory. Basically, if y'all know who Max Weber is, he was a sociologist, and essentially what his theory was that after the Protestant Reformation, Protestants began. They were left with this kind of issue, like when everybody was Catholic, there was a way to like more or less know if you were absolved of your sins because you could go to confession. The Protestants kind of did away with that, but what they realized that they lost was that absolution of knowing, yes, I'm on the right path. And so his theory is that this idea popped up, and it's more or less the Protestant work ethic, if you've ever heard of that. And it's basically this idea that if you work hard and provide for yourself and your family and you live a moral life, then you will be rewarded. So it's like the success you have in the capitalist system is proof of your virtue in this way. Again, I'm not saying this is, I'm not saying one way or the other, but that's just one theory that I have. But it would make sense then that if economic freedom, the ability to, on an honest, hard day's work and be granted your bounty in return, though people that care about that will probably also be socially conservative when it comes to regulating somebody's personal life, right? It just kind of makes sense that if this is tied to morality, the economic sphere, then of course social regulations would be tied to morality as well. So again, that's just one theory. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to agree with that. And again, I would rather hear what you guys have to think, or what you guys have to say about that, because I'd love to hear more possible explanations. So lastly, I want to talk about some of the typical responses I got. The most important political values seem to be liberty, but equality was also very common. Taking care of the people, the rich should pay their fair share, things like that. Somebody said, just let the people do what they want as long as they're not bothering anyone else. That seems to be the most common sentiment that I got from y'all's responses. Some said the questions were confusing, and that's totally fair. Some stuff you're going to have to Google, and some even said that because the questions were confusing, they weren't quite sure whether or not they think the test was accurate. I think that's a true statement. If you don't know what you are answering, then how do you know that that's actually how you feel about the subject? So I would not say that you have to live by this. You don't think that I'm a -4, -0.5, and you go make that your identity, and you go, hi, I'm Jacob, I'm a -4, -0.5, nice to meet you. You know what I mean? That doesn't define you. That doesn't make you what you are. So if you didn't understand the questions, or if you just think the results were wrong, yeah, you can be skeptical of them. That's totally fine. Some of the questions, why were they relevant? I think a lot of that has to do, some of those questions were why are they asking about astrology? Stuff like that. I think it's because somebody's social and cultural beliefs about the world, and especially things that get into cosmology and stuff, that very much does affect somebody's political posture. So I don't know how they used it. I don't know how they weighted it or made it part of the algorithm, but I can see why some of those questions were included, because you do need to gauge somebody's broader belief system for sure. There was no neutral option. That's something that I saw. I think I agree it probably would have been better to have a neutral option, but I think it's because they want you to pick a side. And maybe you could argue that that's just not a very good test, and they just made an error in how they constructed it, but I think they wanted to make you pick a side. And that gets into my last thing. Maybe the test is biased, maybe it isn't. I want you guys to always be, I'm not saying the test was bad, but I'm saying always be skeptical of any survey you take, and just ask, consider for yourself if you think the test was biased, or if it was biased, can you still use it? Because even if it's biased and everyone takes a biased test, you can still compare the results, even if the results might be shifted in one direction. Does that make sense? You can still compare the variation across states, or across online students versus in person, or dual credit versus, normal college. You can make comparisons if you all use the same test, which is definitely a reason why I do this. Confirm what I already knew. Great. I'm glad some people, already have pretty defined beliefs. And then lastly, the results don't define who I really am. This is also true. Again, you're not just -2, -3. That doesn't describe you. You're not just an X and a Y. And I think that's very true. And I think we all need to remember that we're, at the end of the day, we're just human beings. And where we fall, that doesn't mean we're a good or a bad person, So yeah, that's what I have for this. If you guys have any questions about political ideologies or how this relates, you can always shoot me an email and I'll try to clear it up. But essentially what I wanted to show you guys is, first of all, that people are not as extreme as the media wants us to think. That's one thing that it told me. And then second, when we talk about liberty, we need to understand that there are two different aspects of liberty, right? And that gets into political culture. That's what I talked about in my last video lecture. So definitely remember that. Yeah, cool, guys. I hope you appreciated this. I enjoyed talking about it. Yeah, y'all have a good one.